At the beginning of this class, we are at the moment of Yetziat Mitzrayim. We're standing with Moshe Rabbeinu and Klal Yisrael, the Israelites, and the Jewish nation is about to be born. We are born as a nation through Yetziat Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. Beforehand, the patriarchal era or the matriarchal era we've mentioned before is a prehistorical era in terms of our national story. We begin as a nation right now, in this case. And Rashi is the one to raise the question, but anyone could raise the question. Why does the Torah start this way when we become a nation? Take a look. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe ve'el be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. Hashem turns to Moshe and Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim lemor. HaChodesh hazeh lochem Rosh Chodashim Rishon hu lachem lechodshei Hashanah. This month is for you, the head of months, the first of months for you of the entire year. This is the first mitzvah given to us as a people. Why? Why doesn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu begin with something more lofty? Why doesn't he v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, or do you know how you're supposed to deal in business, or whatever it is, something that is more uplifting than what seems to be this technical law. The fact is that there are two laws in that pasuk. You have to identify them both. One is HaChodesh hazeh lochem, and that means Kiddush HaChodesh is Mesura lochem. In other words, God is saying we have a partnership. The partnership is that I make the cycle of the moon, and you determine when it is Rosh Chodesh, based upon testimony, etc., which occurred in the days of the Sanhedrin, and today does not occur. Today we don't have that same mitzvah. Rishon hu lechodshei Hashanah, Nisan is the first of the months. That's the second commandment. So you have two commandments here, and both of them require elaboration. Both of them require our understanding. So again, take a look at the bottom of the page. Kiddush HaChodesh, layer upon layer. The first layer is partnership. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is turning to the slaves and saying to them, understand who you are. You will be partners with me in the creation of time, in the determination of what your calendar is. And by the way, once we'll see in a little while that becomes dramatic. Once you establish the beginning of the month, what else are you establishing? All of the days of the holidays. You're determining when Rosh Hashanah is. You're determining when Yom Kippur is, etc. It's HaKadosh Baruch, and we'll see that in just a moment. Take a look at the next page. Page number 2. And the Talmud has a wonderful way of expressing what we're saying. Amru Veistin Hayom Rosh Hashanah. All right, this is the Talmud Yerushalmi in Rosh Hashanah. The Beis Din says today is Rosh Hashanah based upon testimony, etc. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Omer Lamalachei Ashares Hemidu Bima Yamdu Sanegerin Yamdu Kategorin Amru B'anai Hayom Rosh Hashanah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the heavens turns and says, get everything ready. Put up the stage, have the prosecuting attorney there, the defending attorney there, because my people, my children have said that it's now Rosh Hashanah, so we've got to be ready. Avra l'machar, if for some reason the Beis Din then says no, well, maybe whatever, how it happens is not clear, but they decide, no, it's not Rosh Hashanah today, it's Rosh Hashanah tomorrow. What happens in the heavens? Kadosh Baruch Hu Omer Lamalachei Ashares Heviru Bima. Take away the stage. Take away the defendants. Take away the lawyers. Banai Nimluchu Banai Li'avra L'mochar. Because my sons, my children, have determined that this isn't Rosh Hashanah, that tomorrow is Rosh Hashanah. Now, this concept of partnership with God, and this is one of the reasons I think that this is the first mitzvah. This concept of partnership with God, which is so clear in this particular mitzvah, is really the foundations upon which the halachic process is based. One of the halacha, Torah Ba'al Peh, what we call the oral law, can be divided into a number of categories. Have any of you been with me for that class? All right. If not, then I'm going to give it. All right. The oral law can be divided into a number of categories. We'll talk about it in more depth when we get to that session. But one of them is the determination, the handing over of divine law to man. The fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says these are the principles, these are the ways to interpret them, and now go do your best. And that concept that God is handing the law over to us, or to the rabbis, to the experts, that concept, and we'll see that expertise is necessary, that concept is fundamental to Jewish thought. Moshe Feinstein, Zatzal, one of the luminaries of the 20th century, says in the Hakdama to Igros Moshe. Igros Moshe is a work that contains some of the responses that he's given to questions that he received. It's really a Jewish Ann Landers, lahavdil. All right, but what it's, in other words, it's basically your Rav Moshe is responding to various questions, and you'll see the question. It'll take up 2 lines, and then the answer will take up 5 pages, 6 pages, where he traces back. And in the introduction to that work, Rav Moshe says, "I don't want to do this. This is too big a responsibility. I don't want it. I don't want it on my shoulders to determine what the Jews should be doing and not doing. But what gives me solace is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells me that whatever answer I come up with, as long as I enter into the process with loyalty, whatever answer I come up with will be right for us." And that is a huge concept. That is an unbelievable concept. And it's one that really makes the halacha different from other religious laws. Lahavdil, the Pope, you don't have to go. The Pope, lahavdil, right, speaks for God. It's not a number of years ago, Time magazine of the States had an issue where they dealt with religious world leaders. And they had the Dalai Lama standing on the mountaintop looking out, right? And they had the Pope standing before the Vatican with all his robes. And they had the rabbi standing there with a book. Now, I don't know if they realized what they were saying, but that's it. When someone asks us what the halacha might be, whether it's a communal rabbi or he then has to go to a posek perhaps, the expert who is providing the information doesn't get it from divine inspiration. He hits the books. He goes back to the Gemara, he goes back to the Chumash, he goes back to the Gemara, he goes to the Rambam, to the Shulchan Aruch, etc., etc., etc. And what happens is he'll give you and as long as he is entering into the process with intent to find the truth, then whatever answer he comes up with becomes part of Jewish law. I have a book in my library, which I got from my grandfather, which is called Otzar Dinim U'Minhagim. It's an encyclopedic work of dinim, of laws and customs. And in this, and it's done in alphabetical order. And in this book is the word telephone. Right? This was written kind of at the turn of the century. And in this book it says, most authorities say you can use the telephone on Shabbos. All right. Now what happened was there was a debate. And at that point, perhaps but the majority of poskim eventually learning what the telephone was, gave a different answer. But that's what happens. In fact, what happens is that in any generation, I believe, you'll have the debates, by the next generation, it's been decided. All right, and you're moving on from there. The halachic process really originally depends on having a Sanhedrin, which we don't have. So we have individual poskim, differences of opinion, and we'll talk about that in another session. Now, so that's one. Number one, Kiddush HaChodesh is perhaps one of the clearest examples of the halachic process and of our partnership with God. Number two, Kiddush HaKodesh is the start of Jewish time. Time. And if you take a look at the quote from Rav Soloveitchik, he says, as only he can say, time awareness is a singular faculty of the free man, who can use it or abuse it. To a slave it is a curse, or a matter of indifference. It is not an instrument which he can harness to his purposes. The free man wants time to move slowly, because presumably it is being employed for his purposes. The distinction, the Rav goes on to talk more about this, the distinction between a slave and a free man, says the Rav, is time. Is how the fact that the slave is burdened with time, and the free person has the ability, the capacity to harness time and to use time for your benefit. But the problem is that time is very hard to harness, isn't it? In fact, it's very interesting. Time is the one thing that really defies us and almost taunts us. When you want it to go fast, like you're sitting in a boring class, you want it to go fast, it goes slow. And you want it to go slow, it goes fast, right? In other words, time really defies us and taunts us. So how do you harness time? So Rav Soloveitchik has an answer. Turn to the next page. The Rav says that there are three processes, if you will, that the Jew is supposed to experience in each moment of time. And by the way, the Rav is, if you've ever read any of his works, he didn't write them, but people wrote them down. The joke my time was, that someone went into his office and saw the Rav had a thesaurus. And another person said, yeah, the Rav was correcting the thesaurus, right? If you take a look at his works, it could conceivably be. I mean, he uses terminology. The Rav was a perfect example of melding that which is good from the outside world with what is uniquely ours, and leaving out what is not correct. Very important. Okay, so the Rav says there are three processes, three procedures we're supposed to experience in every moment of time, and each of these is essential to transcending time or capturing time, whichever way you want to look at it. The first is retrospection, he says. Retrospection is not just knowing your history, it's carrying your history with you. It's living your life not in the shadow of, but by being informed of the historical saga of our people. And we see that today. Today there's a lot of discussion now about the Holocaust because it's Holocaust Remembrance Day. We have to live with that. That has to be part of what we are and who we are. In other words, that should power us and say, we're, thank God, in a different situation. We can look at what we can accomplish. Who knows how you harness it? But that's supposed to be with us as we travel. And the good times as well, the glory times as well. Retrospection. Anticipation. Anticipation is a belief in a glorious future. Now, the Rav really says very beautifully, he says that the contribution of the Jew to historical awareness is that we introduced a destiny-driven history, right? That until then, everyone believed that history was governed by causality, he says, right? What's causality? It's being pushed by the past. In other words, one generation does things, prepares for the next generation builds on what came before. We, however, say, no, we're not just pushed by the past, we're propelled by the future. Right? We're going somewhere. We're traveling to a particular destination. What that destination is, and the details of that destination is not totally clear to us. The Mashiach times, etc., etc. But we're going there. We're traveling on a road that takes us back all the way to Abraham and will take us to that destination. And that awareness is a huge contribution, because it changes the way we look. I mean, history governed by causality doesn't work. Well, it works, but negatively. For example, at the beginning of the 1900s, everybody was feeling pretty good, and they were saying, this century is going to be the best century of all. This is going to be the century where we've come to a certain moral status, we've come to a certain scientific status. This is going to be the generation that's going to be the best iteration of time. And it has been maybe the worst generation, the worst century, I'm sorry. Right? So in other words, there's no you can't say with specificity. I'm trying to think of the word that I want. I don't know. Do you have this problem too sometimes? All right, thank you. Good. All right, good to know. All right. You can't predict. That's the word. You can't predict that what will happen based upon the past. You have to build your own time. All right? So anticipation is destiny-driven history. So we've got retrospection, anticipation, and finally we come to the hardest of all, and that is appreciation, says the Rabbi. Appreciation is the determination of the value of your own time in life. That understanding what your generation, what your crowd, what you're supposed to contribute to Jewish history. And retrospection and anticipation are supposed to inform appreciation. In other words, the Rav says appreciation is the combination of all three. I have to have the past with me, I have to have the future with me, and I have to have the present not defined only by that, but defined partially by those events or those values, and then bring in my own values, bring in my own time, determine how all of Jewish history affects me. Probably when we get closer to Pesach, we'll talk about the Seder at some point. But if you think about the Seder, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. People don't notice this. One of the things, actually had the schus to publish a Haggadah, and what I did in the Haggadah was, people always look at the Seder as little details. In other words, there's karpas, there's yach. No, hardly anyone takes a step back to look at the Seder's flow. And if you look at the flow of the Seder, it's very interesting. It mirrors these three, right? Everything before the meal is the past. Everything after the meal is the future. What's the meal? The present. And it's supposed to be informed, and we are enveloped. It's a meal like no other meal in our experience. It's a meal where we're living, we're trying to bring out these three processes. Yes.
I'm sure a lot of other people have heard this. The past is history, the future is mystery. Today is a gift from Hashem, and that's why it's called the present.
All right, so very nice. Past is history, the future is mystery. I'm not sure that I agree with that, though, right? Because what we're saying is the past is not just history, right? The past is something that it has to be alive in me, right? Okay, and the Rav says that when you do these three procedures or processes, you experience them successfully, then you are transcending time. You're not controlled by time, because you're living in a flow that goes past the particular moment in which you live and brings in the future, the past, and the present. Another aspect of time is the concept of kedushat zman. There are two different major kinds of kedusha that are found in Jewish thought. There's kedushat makom and kedushat zman. The kedusha, the sanctity of a place, and the sanctity of time. Which of the two is more powerful? If you look at Jewish law, sanctity of time overwhelms the sanctity of place in a number of ways. For example, just a quick example, the building of the Mishkan. Building of the Mishkan would continue until what? Shabbat. Shabbat, they would put their tools down, and then they begin again. Right? The idea being that kedushat zman transcends even the holiness of a place. And what's fascinating is that time is really the first example of kedusha in the Torah. God seems to create sanctity and time simultaneously. When does he do that? Right? God sanctifies the seventh day. It's the first act of sanctification. And what he's sanctifying is time. We're supposed to learn from the times that we experience and let them inform all our other experiences. Shabbos is supposed to affect our week. It's not just supposed to be an isolated moment of time. I think I told you about my friend who was a chain smoker, who maybe not. And unfortunately, he smoked about a pack a day or two. Come Shabbos, he would put down the cigarette. And if you walked up to him at any point on Shabbos and said to him, Sid, do you miss the cigarettes? He says, Shabbos. No, of course not. He would light the next cigarette from the Havdalah candle. And unfortunately, he passed away because of lung cancer. He failed to understand that Shabbos is supposed to inform the week. If you can do it on Shabbos, you can do it during the week as well. If you can spend time with your family on Shabbos, then you can spend time with your family. Shabbos is meant to be a model that informs the week. So time is our most precious commodity, really, isn't it? And I believe that's why Kedushat Zman transcends Kedushat Makom. Because what we're doing when we give God our time, when we observe Shabbat, when we observe Yom Tov, we are basically saying, Kadosh Baruch Hu, we're going to take some of our time, which is so precious. It's our most precious commodity, and we're going to sanctify it, and we're going to partner with you in that sanctification. And Kedushat Zman can be different for different events. For example, when it comes to Shabbos, the rabbis say Shabbat is mekudosh va'omed, that it is sanctified by God from the beginning of time. And concerning Shabbos, I don't really have a sanctification role. My role is to experience the sanctification that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created on Shabbos. When it comes to Yom Tov, totally different. The Kedushat Zman of Yom Tov is a partnership between man and God because of Kiddush HaKodesh, or reflected in Kiddush HaKodesh. If we determine when the holiday is, we're also going to determine the character of its sanctification. And therefore, there are differences. You can cook under certain restrictions on Yontif. Yontif, if you look, this is not true with the Sephardic traditions, but if you look at the Amidot of Shabbat in the Ashkenazic traditions, there is no paragraph of Yismechu b'malchuscha, right, of Simcha. Shabbos is not Simcha. Shabbos is what? Oneg, correct. Oneg is I'm experiencing HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. I'm enjoying this. I'm experiencing it. But I'm not creating when it comes to Shabbos in that regard. When it comes to Yom Tov, partnership. Sanctification, partnership. Okay, let's go on next. So we've spoken about how the fact that we said Kiddush HaChodesh really governed God's actions in a way, right? Determined the time and the place of the holidays. But the Rambam comes and makes a very important point. The Rambam comes and says, Ein ri'iyas hayoreach misura l'chol adam. Right at the bottom of the page number 3. The determination of the months is not given to everybody. In other words, I can't say, even in time when we sanctify the month, I couldn't say I'm sitting in Tel Aviv, there wasn't any Tel Aviv, come up, in Yafo, all right, I couldn't say, I'm going to determine, I'm going to look at the side, it is given to the Bezdin. And the Bezdin relies on edus, relies on testimony of witnesses to determine when it's either now what's the issue? It's either going to be a month that is chaser or a month that is mole. It's either going to be a month that is 29 days or a month that's 30 days. That's the whole geschäft. That's what we're dealing with. Well, you also deal with leaping the year, but that's another issue. All right. So says the Ramam, Elul bezdin ha'davar masur ad she'ikadshu o bezdin v'yikvu oso hayom rosh chodesh. They have to determine bezdin, right? The court will determine when Rosh Chodesh is and proclaim it. Now, this may seem self-understood, but again, I'm going to quote the Rav in a very interesting way. Korach rebels against Moshe Rabbeinu and against Aharon in Sefer Bamidbar. But Korach's rebellion, interestingly enough, is seen differently by the rabbis. They paint pictures of what he said and how he did it. For example, they said the Korach came to Moshe and to the people and said, I have a question. If I have a talis that the garment is totally blue, right? So you know this. Do I need a blue thread as well? And Moshe said, yes, you do. Korach said, ha. That's ridiculous. If I have a house that is filled with Torah scrolls, floor to ceiling, well, not on the floor, but, right? Do I still need a mezuzah? And Moshe answers, yes, you do. And Korach mocks the answer. Now, what are Chazal saying to us with those pictures? Korach's rebellion wasn't just a rebellion against Aaron and Moshe. It was a rebellion against halachic authority. Moshe is the first decider of halakha. If you take him away from that role, the halakha stops. If the halakha stops, by the way, you and I wouldn't be sitting here. We would have disappeared a long time ago. Because what has held us together over the years, right, is not place. Right, the halakha and how we live and what we do. Okay, tradition. Very good. We were singing tradition. Now, so therefore, Korach's answer had to be, Korach's rebellion is answered in such powerful way. Why the earth swallows, etc., etc. Because in some ways, this was the most dangerous moment for that generation. In some ways, if God didn't respond with strength, then they would. And what the Rav says is it's a rebellion of common sense. The common sense rebellion against halakhic authority. That's really what the rabbis are portraying. And in our day, he says, if you need medicine, you wouldn't prescribe your own medicine, right? You'd go to the expert. He says, why do so many Jews feel that they can determine what the halacha is, as opposed to going to the expert to determine that law? It's the common sense rebellion. It's Korach's rebellion against halachic authority. And therefore, what we have to recognize is that the halacha is essential for our survival, and essential for the halacha is rabbinic authority. Essential for the halacha is the rabbis making the decisions. And with all that brings, and all their flaws, and all their, nonetheless. Okay. Now, turn to the next page. I'm now on page number 4. Turn to 4. Right. If you turn to 4, you find a dramatic event that occurs that underscores everything we've been talking about till now. And that is Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua. Right? 2 Mishnayim. The first Mishnah, and unfortunately, I didn't underline certain sections that I should have, but if you take a look at the first underline, you'll see that what it says is 2 witnesses come, and they say to the rabbis, to the Bezdin, we saw the moon in the east in the morning and in the west in the evening. Omar Rav Yochanan ben Nuri, Eidei Sheker. These are false witnesses. It's not possible. They're giving testimony that makes no sense, etc. Another set comes. Odbo Shnaim v'Amru. Re'inu bismano. We saw it at the right time, the time it was expected, but afterwards it disappeared. We didn't see it anymore. And again, the rabbis say but Rabban Gamliel accepted that testimony. For whatever reason, Rabban Gamliel said they're not false witnesses. In each case, I accept their testimony. Rabbi Yoshua, another major figure, and there's a lot of dealings between Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua, etc., in our history. Rabban Gamliel says, I believe Yochanan ben Nuri is right. I believe that these are false witnesses. So I think we should not accept their testimony, and we should determine the calendar on the basis of that non-acceptance. Rabban Gamliel says, wait a minute, I'm the authority now. I'm the Nasi. And Rabbi Yehoshua goes, and in the text here it says that Rabbi Akiva encounters him. And Rabbi Akiva says, why are you so sad? What's bothering you? And Rabbi Yehoshua tells him why, and he answers, Yesh li lilmod shakol ma she'asa Rabban Gamliel asui. You should understand that whatever Rabban Gamliel said, he is the authority now, asui. He goes to Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus. And see what Rabbi Gamliel did. I forgot to tell you this. He didn't just when he heard that Rabbi Yehoshua was opposing his decision, he said, I ordered you to come on the Yom Kippur, the day that you think is Yom Kippur. I order you to desecrate that day. In other words, I order you to come to me with your staff and with your belongings, and stand before me, do things that are only done bechol, only during the week, only during a non-holiday. Yom Kippur. I'm Rabbi Yehoshua. I think this isn't Yom Kippur. This is Yom Kippur. And Rabbi Gamliel says, no, he's strong. You have to appear before me with your staff in your hand and your bag with you. He encounters other great scholars. Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus. Says Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus, if you question Rabban Gamliel, you're going to have to question every Bezdin that existed since the time of Moshe. You're opening up a Pandora's box. There has to be an authority that determines, and when we had a Sanhedrin, this is how it worked, and that authority would determine, and you have to accept it. Eventually, take a look at the third line from the bottom. Notal maklo umosav. Rabbi Yehoshua took his staff and his money, biyado, V'holach liyavna itzer Rabban Gamliel b'yom shechol yom Purim lios b'cheshbono. Rabbi Yoshua eventually gives in. He understands that he can't, and he appears before Rabban Gamliel with his staff and with his money. And what does Rabban Gamliel say? He says, Bo b'shalom Rebbe v'talmidai. Come in peace, my teacher. He's saying this to Rabbi Yoshua, and my student. My teacher, the Chochmah, with wisdom, you transcend me in wisdom. V'talmidai shekibal dvarai. And my Talmud, because you accepted what I mean. So this is an example of the tension that exists in the determination of halakha. And one could argue why, that this was supposed to work with a central authority. We don't have that central authority now. Everybody goes to their own posek, and there's potential for very serious differences of opinion. One major controversy that takes place now halachically is the controversy concerning, and I'm sorry to say, brain death. Brain death. What is the halacha if, God forbid, a million times, you have someone who is brain dead? In other words, and it's not the brain death that is used on a popular level. It means total brain death. It means there's no brain activity even in the brain stem. In other words, which controls reflexive action. But the person is on a respirator and is breathing. And the classical definition of death in the past has always been breathing. So and now why does this become so important even more? Because of transplantation, right? There are certain organs that you can only transplant from an individual like this, who is, if you consider him dead, you can do it. If you don't, so one authority is saying you unplug that respirator, it's murder. The other authority is saying the guy's dead. And if he's dead, you're keeping him alive artificially. You're not even keeping him alive. And therefore, we can transplant organs, we can take him off the respirator, etc. Now, this is a debate that is waging in the halls of the community, but it's being decided. It's being decided out in the field by the rabbis. I argue. I'm pretty sure that most rabbis are accepting brain death as death. And I believe that by the next generation, it won't be an argument anymore. There'll be the decision, just like telephone, lahavdil, in that book, where there was an argument concerning whether or not you could use it, and apparently major experts said you could, and now we know we can't. So what is a debate in one generation ends up being solved in the next. So that's what will happen. But it's an example of where the halacha is encountering tremendously difficult issues, and the determination of the halacha can make a world of difference. Now let's go on. Why the moon? Why don't we follow the sun? So there are a variety of potential answers. One is that the moon is the only celestial body that what? That changes, that grows, right? Chodesh, what does the word Chodesh come from? Chadash. Our life is supposed to mirror the moon, not at its descent, but only at its ascent. We're supposed to feel that we're constantly in motion towards higher goals for ourselves, for our lives. And that's why you have, very often in Jewish thought, you will find mitzvot that celebrate the journey as opposed to the destination. In other words, the Sfirat HaOmer, right, the counting of the Omer day by day by day, is to make us understand that, yes, we want to get to Revelation, and that's important, but the journey there is even more important. And things can happen in the journey that you don't expect and that can enrich your lives. This gives lie to a common thread concerning time, quality time. I'm going to have quality time with the family. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work every day until 9 o'clock, but I'll eke out the time and that's quality time. That's when it will make a difference. Things that happen at other times can be more impactful. I can remember a ball game with my father, right, more than all the teaching he might have given me, right? In other words, a pick-up ball game in the backyard and what that meant. You never know. Grandparents, you never know when a moment will come that will be remembered. Think of your memories. They're not necessarily the memories that you would have expected would be memories, and certainly not those that your parents would have expected. You can't predict. So time and the journey is extremely important. Yes?
The waxing of the moon reaches its maximum strength, as it were. It's exactly the time where two of our major festivals are. Shem seems to have connected that.
Very interesting. Right. That you said that the journey of the moon reaches its fullest at a point where two of our festivals are at that moment. Right? So Rosh Hashanah. Oh, Pesach and Sukkot. Right. It's that. That's right. I was thinking of it beginning at the beginning of the journey. Right. So we celebrate that. Correct. We celebrate the moons Pesach and Sukkot. All right. So that is again the journey, getting to that, traveling towards that moment. And says the Aruch HaShulchan in the bottom of your page, why do we say Hallel on Rosh Chodesh? Hallel on Rosh Chodesh is not a mitzvah. It's not even a minhag. It's something we adopted. Why? Because it represents Jewish survival. He says there are times when we look at the sky and it's dark. There are times when we look at our situation and it's bleak. And there are other times when we can work our way through that step by step, and the moon begins to become brighter, and our experience begins to become better. And that's the moon represents the journey of the Jewish people across history. Darkness and light, darkness and light, darkness and light. Okay, let's turn the page. Page number 5. Oh boy, we're running out of time. All right, we spoke about the last thing concerning. So basically, we've seen, as I said in the beginning, layer upon layer of meaning in the concept of Kiddush HaChodesh. Layer upon layer of meaning that makes this the perfect mitzvah with which to begin the halachic process as a nation. But the second directive, what's the second directive? Nisan should be for you Rosh Hashanah. Well, we don't follow that, do we? Right? In other words, when do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah? Tishrei. Right? What does it mean that Nisan, and why is there? So first of all, you should know that in the Jewish calendar there are multiple Rosh Hashanah. Right? The New Year, the one we know about is the New Year coming up, the New Year of the trees. Every other tradition can agree on what their when their New Year begins, and we debate. It begins here, it begins here, it begins here. Why can't we go on our mind? Because this Jewish tradition wants us to experience and to value so many different things. And the multiple Rosh Hashanah, take the New Year of the trees, we value the trees, value nature, value the things around you. And by making these Rosh Hashanah parts of the Jewish calendar, what we're being told is, think about it. Think about the things that surround you, that in your experience, in your surroundings, in your environment, think about the things you should appreciate. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts Adam in Gan Eden, the Torah tells us, La'avda u'l'shamra. He puts him in Gan Eden to work it and to guard it. That's one of those dialectical phrases that the Torah uses, like Ezer Kenegdo and Ger V'Toshav. Basically, Avda U'Shamra is if I'm working the land, I'm mining, I'm doing all of those things, then I'm not respecting the land, I'm taking what I need from the land. But I have to balance that. I have to balance that with an appreciation of the environment around me. And that's the big debate today about global warming, et cetera, and how we're changing the environment. These are issues. These are serious issues. We have to also respect the world around us and the way that God created the world. I remember hearing a story once of farmers who were being invaded by a certain rodent that was eating their crops. So what did they do? They eradicated the rodent. They basically poisoned the rodent, and it no longer was a problem. Only to find that that rodent used to eat a certain bug that was an even bigger problem for them. And therefore, by eradicating the rodent, they increased the problems concerning their crops. So we're not so brilliant. In other words, we've got to understand that the world around us is created by God, is meant to go a certain way, and we have to respect that. Now, Rosh Hashanah of Nisan and Tishrei, however, are the two major Rosh Hashanah. What do they each speak to us about? So I'll tell you that a hint can be seen from an important halacha. The halacha is that a king's reign begins, if it's a Jewish king, at Nisan, and if it's a non-Jewish king, at Tishrei. In other words, now this was important. The text you can find it in this text. Why was this important? Because contracts were dated by the reign of the king. And therefore, if the king became king, a Jewish king, 2 months before Nisan, let's say, when Nisan comes, he's now in the second year of his reign. And that's what's put on the shtar. That's what's put on the contract. And when it comes to a non-Jewish king, Tishrei. Nisan is our Rosh Hashanah. It's when we were born. It's when the Jewish nation comes into being. Tishrei is our belonging to the universe, being part of the world, being part of the outside world, determining what we can take that's appropriate, that can be part of our world, and keeping out what doesn't match our thoughts and our values. The symbolism is huge. One would think that once we accept Nisan as a Rosh Hashanah, Tishrei would disappear, right? But it doesn't, because we're supposed to be, as I've told you before, the Ger V'Toshav. We're supposed to be. Avram stands at the end of his career, and he says to Bnei Chet, to the Hittites, "I am a stranger and a citizen together with you." It's a dialectical phrase. How can you be both a stranger and a citizen? The answer is that's the best sociological definition of the Jew across the ages. Ger V'Toshav. Put me in any country, and I'll rise to the top if you let me. But I'm also different. And I maintain that difference. And that Avram culminates his career with that statement. And it's important for us, and that's what Nisan and Tishrei represent. Nisan and Tishrei represent that I am part of the world community, that's Tishrei, and I'm part of my own unique community, and that's Nisan. And both exist because we have to have that balance in our lives. So hopefully we have taken our own journey towards understanding why HaKadosh Baruch Hu begins, might be the reasons why he begins. We don't know the reasons he begins, but these are potentially reasons why he begins our journey in time, Jewish time, with the establishment of Jewish time. And with the directive that he gives, HaChodesh hazeh lachem Rosh Chodeshim, Rishon hu lachem b'chodshei Hashanah. And specifically by launching Jewish time this way, we enter into a journey that is tremendously meaningful and one that can enrich our lives. Have a good day.